Reach the bottom of the shaft and the heat is gone. It is cool down here and dark, and there is a sound you would not expect this far from any river. Running water. The tunnel is barely wide enough for one person. Someone dug it by hand, by candlelight, more than 2,000 years ago, and it still carries water today, sloping down through the rock from the mountains toward fields you cannot see from here. Climb back up the shaft and the world flips. White salt to the horizon. No river anywhere. So how does a land with almost no great rivers grow an empire? That question has an answer, and the answer has a name. This is Iran. Most of what reaches you about it arrives as a headline, loud and short, and then it is gone. The country underneath the headlines is older and slower than that. People were moving water through hand-cut tunnels here before Rome was a city. They raised a palace at Persepolis around 515 BCE, planted gardens in the middle of deserts, and wrote poems that ordinary families still say out loud at dinner. About 90 million people live here now, most of them in cities, on a high plateau ringed by mountains and crossed by some of the harshest desert on Earth. Six UNESCO World Heritage Sites sit inside its borders. And the present is hard, sanctions, an oil economy under pressure, recent conflict that the rest of the world watched from a distance. Two clocks run at once. One counts in thousands of years, the other counts in weeks. The water in that tunnel has been running through both. Stand on a ridge of the Alborz Mountains in the north, and you can almost see two countries at once. Behind you, the interior, dry, pale, running on for hundreds of kilometers. In front, below the tree line, the ground turns green and stays green all the way down to the Caspian Sea. That drive from bare rock to wet forest takes about an hour. Few places change so fast. Most of Iran sits high. The country covers around 1.6 million square kilometers, and a little over half of it is mountain and desert. Two ranges do most of the work. The Zagros runs northwest to southeast like a long spine, its parallel ridges stacked one behind the next, many of its peaks above 3,000 meters. The Alborz curves along the southern shore of the Caspian and holds in the rain. Between and beyond them lies the plateau, the raised floor where the cities and the history mostly sit. Inside that ring of mountains, the land dries out fast. Two deserts fill the center. The Dashti Kavir is a great salt flat, crusted and cracked, a thin skin of salt over soft mud. To its southeast, the Dashti Lut is hotter and emptier still, scoured into long ridges by the wind, with surface temperatures among the highest ever recorded anywhere on the planet. You can drive through it for a day and pass nothing. No town, no tree, no water. So the country is built on contrast, and the contrast is the whole story. The green strip by the Caspian is thin, in places only a few kilometers wide, squeezed between the sea and the wall of the Alborz. Cross that wall and the rain quits. The reason is plain enough. The mountains catch the wet air coming off the sea and wring it dry before it can reach the interior, leaving the plateau in a long rain shadow. Water becomes the one thing everyone is short of, and the one thing everyone has to outsmart. That shortage shaped what came after. Where the rain falls, in the north and on the western slopes of the Zagros, there are forests, orchards, fields of wheat. Where it does not, there is salt and stone, and people who learned to fetch water from somewhere else entirely. Empire here did not grow in spite of the desert. It grew because a handful of people worked out how to carry water across it. The map can look like an accident. It is closer to a plan. From the air, the desert near a town like Yazd is freckled with small craters, a line of them running dead straight across empty ground, evenly spaced, as if the land had been stitched. They are not bomb holes, and they are not ordinary wells. They are the breathing holes of a qanat. A qanat is a tunnel that brings water out of a mountain. High up, at the foot of the rising ground, where rain and snowmelt soak into the rock, a builder digs down to the water table. Then he turns and digs sideways, on the gentlest possible downhill grade, sometimes for tens of kilometers, until the tunnel surfaces again far out on the dry plain. Gravity does the rest. The water walks itself down to the fields, year after year, with no machinery involved. Those craters in the desert are the vertical shafts, sunk at intervals, so workers could haul out the rubble and let in air. People here were building these a very long time ago. The oldest qanats may go back more than 20,500 years, which sets them in roughly the same era as the first Persian empires. The timing is not chance. A city on this plateau could only grow as large as its water supply, and the qanat quietly lifted that ceiling. It let towns settle far from any river, out where the ground was flat and otherwise useless. Half the old map of Iran only makes sense once you know the water was arriving from out of sight, underground. Digging one was brutal and dangerous. A man called a muqani went down the shafts and tunneled in the dark by lamplight, in thin air, hauling the spoil up by rope, trusting the roof to hold. Families inherited the trade. A single qanat might take years to finish and then run for centuries, kept alive by small, constant repairs passed from grandfather to grandson. The water was shared by careful local rule, measured out by the hour, because there was never quite enough of it. This is the part the headlines miss. Yes, long before oil, the wealth of this place was water, and the cleverness behind it was not a monument you can photograph. It was a slope, a long, patient, downhill slope cut through solid rock by people who would never live to see the far end fill a single basin. Yes. Stand again at the mouth of one of those tunnels and listen. That sound in the dark is older than most of the world's capitals. Walk up the great stone staircase at Persepolis, and the steps come shallow and wide, built low on purpose so that delegations could climb them slowly, in robes, without stumbling. The risers are carved with rows of figures in procession, men leading bulls, carrying bowls, bringing tribute from every corner of an empire that once reached from the edge of Greece to the Indus. The faces are worn smooth now. The procession still moves. Persepolis went up around 515 BCE, the ceremonial capital of the Achaemenids, the first Persian empire, and for a stretch the largest the world had seen. The kings who ordered it, Darius and the ones who followed, did not build small. The columns ran far overhead, each crowned with twin bulls. The main hall was made to swallow a crowd. The whole place was meant to overwhelm, and after 25 centuries of weather and ruin, it still half does. Then in 330 BCE, Alexander of Macedon took the city, and Persepolis burned. Whether the fire was an accident, a drunken dare, or cold payback for the earlier burning of Athens, the sources disagree, and they always have. Outcome is not in question. The great halls came down. What is left is the bones, door frames, column stumps, the staircase, a stone king fighting a stone lion in a struggle carved to have no end. Drive a short way, and the mood drops to a whisper. Pasargadae is older and emptier, the first Achaemenid capital, set out on an open plain. Its main feature is a plain six-stepped tomb of pale stone, simple almost to the point of severity. By long tradition, it holds Cyrus, the king who founded the empire, and who the old accounts claim let conquered peoples keep their gods and their customs. Whether every line of that reputation is deserved is another argument with no clean ending. The tomb says little either way. It just sits there, weathered on the grass. The point is that Persepolis and Pasargadae are only the bottom layer. On top of the Achaemenids came the Sasanians, who cut huge battle scenes straight into cliff faces. On top of them came the long Islamic centuries, with their domes, their tilework, a new written language laid over the old one. Iran is not one ruin. It is ruins stacked on ruins, each new empire building beside the last, rather than scrubbing it away. The way the qanats kept running under whoever happened to rule above ground. Yes, that is the odd feeling of standing here. The empire that built these steps is long gone, and the steps are still full of people climbing them. In the late afternoon, the main square of Isfahan fills up. Families spread carpets on the grass. Kettles appear. Children kick balls across an open space the size of several football fields. On all four sides, the buildings glow. A palace gate, two mosques, the tall arched mouth of a covered bazaar. The domes are blue, a particular turquoise. And as the sun drops, they shift from bright to deep to almost black against the sky. This is Naqsh-e-Jahan, the square the Safavid king Shah Abbas laid out around the start of the 1600s when he moved his capital to Isfahan. It was the first place in Iran that UNESCO added to its World Heritage List, and once you stand in it, the reasons is obvious. The plan is ruthless. One huge rectangle, framed on every side, with a palace where the king could watch, a private chapel for the court, a great public mosque twisted on its axis to face Mecca, and a bazaar pumping trade through the whole arrangement. Power, prayer, and money set down so each one could keep an eye on the others. The mosques are where the patience shows, and this. The big domes are skinned in glazed tile, cut and fitted by hand into patterns that climb without a visible seam from floor to the crown of the vault. Deep blues and ochres turning slowly as you walk. People used to say that Isfahan was half the world. Looking straight up inside one of those domes, the line stops sounding like a brag and starts sounding like a measurement. Step through a gateway off the square, and the noise drains into a garden. The Persian garden is its own invention, and it obeys a strict rule: a walled rectangle, quartered by channels of water that meet at the center. The water is the entire reason it exists. It comes in by gravity, the same trick as the qanat, led along narrow stone runnels into still pools that double the trees and the sky. Outside the wall, dust. Inside, shade and the steady sound of water. They built paradise as a floor plan. The word paradise itself comes down to us from an old Persian term for precisely this kind of walled garden. 26 such places, gardens and squares and mosques and whole desert towns, hold UNESCO World Heritage status today. That is a heavy inheritance for one country to look after, and looking after it through a hard decade is not a small thing. Sit on that grass in Isfahan as the call to prayer rolls across the square. The country in the news and the country under these blue domes are, somehow, the same country. Count out the cash for a week of groceries in Iran lately, and you are holding a thick brick of notes. The numbers printed on them are large and getting larger. In 2025, the central bank issued its biggest banknote ever, 10 million rial on a single bill, because the older ones had stopped being practical to carry. Prices shift between two visits to the same shop. For an ordinary family, the cost of bread, of cooking oil, of medicine has been climbing faster than wages for a long time. This is the part of Iran that does reach the outside world, and often the only part. The economy has been under heavy international sanctions, lifted and reimposed and then tightened hard again, pressing on the country's oil sales, its banks, its shipping. Inflation through 2025 was estimated above 40%, among the steepest anywhere. The government has not published full national accounts since 2024, so even the basic figures arrive with an asterisk, though the World Bank estimated the economy contracted across 2025 and into 2026. Numbers like these move month to month. The direction has not, and yet the ground itself is anything but poor. Iran sits on some of the largest oil and gas reserves on the planet. The problem was never that nothing here is worth anything. The problem is getting it to a buyer, and most of the country's oil has to leave through one narrow gate at the bottom of the map. The Strait of Hormuz, a choke point only a few dozen kilometers wide at its tightest, through which a large share of the world's seaborne oil passes every single day. Whoever holds either shore of that strait holds a valve the whole planet watches. That is the odd math of the place. A country can be land-rich and cash-poor at once, holding a fortune underground, while a parent in Tehran works out the cost of dinner. The wealth is real and so is the squeeze, and they do not cancel each other. They sit side by side, the way the salt desert sits beside the green coast. The last few years sharpened all of it. Iran has gone through serious conflict and renewed sanctions this decade, watched closely from outside, and lived through directly from inside. The details belong to the news, and the news handles them at full volume. What rarely makes the news is the plain persistence underneath. Shops that open anyway, a qanat water still arriving whether the rial is up or down that week. A civilization this old has watched currencies come and go before. It is watching another one now. Morning in most Iranian towns starts with a line at the bread shop. The baker slaps a flat sheet of dough onto the inside wall of a blazing oven, waits, then hooks it out a few seconds later, blistered and steaming, sometimes still pocked with hot pebbles from the oven floor. People carry it home, draped over a hand or a bicycle handlebar, too hot to fold. It costs almost nothing and turns up at every meal. Bread here is not a side dish. It is the floor the rest of the table stands on. Then comes rice, and rice is where the cooking gets serious. A good Iranian cook does not simply boil it. The rice is parboiled, drained, then steamed slowly in a covered pot with a little oil and a lot of patience until the grains come out separate and the very bottom sets into a golden crust. That crust is called tadig, the bottom of the pot, and it is the most fought-over thing on the table. Lifting it out in one crackling sheet, getting that snap, is the whole reward. Families hold strong views on whose tadig is best, and the views are not polite. Color comes from saffron, the dried red threads of a crocus that grows well on the dry plateau and sells, by weight, for more than most metals. A pinch gets steeped in warm water until it bleeds deep orange, then spooned over rice or into sweets and drinks. The smell is hard to pin down and impossible to forget, somewhere between honey, hay, and warm metal. A little goes far, which helps, because a lot would cost a small fortune. Through all of it runs tea, black, strong, poured from a pot kept warm all day, taken in small clear glasses. Yes. The trick is to set a hard sugar lump between your front teeth and draw the hot tea through it, so the sweetness thins out as the glass empties. Tea is how a guest gets welcomed long before any real business is mentioned. Refusing the first glass borders on rude. Finishing it, and being poured a second, is just the ordinary shape of an afternoon. None of this lives in a museum. The bread, the rice, the saffron, the tea. This is the part of the culture remade 3 times a day, by hand, in ordinary kitchens, and it has been for centuries. Empires rose and burned up on the cliff faces. Down here, somebody kept breaking the tadig. That is its own kind of monument, the kind you can eat. On the night before the spring equinox, a table gets set in homes across the country, and on it sit 7 small things, each one beginning with the same letter in Persian, each standing for something. Sprouted wheat for rebirth, a sweet pudding, a dried fruit, garlic, sumac vinegar, a coin. This is the Hafez scene, the heart of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which lands at the precise instant the sun crosses into spring. Whole families wait up for the turn, ep. When it comes, often down to the minute on the clock, the year is new, and people hug and eat and visit for days. Nowruz is older than Islam in Iran, older than most of the country's borders, and it never went away. The same goes for Yalda, the longest night of the year, when families sit up to outlast the dark with pomegranates, watermelons saved since summer, dried nuts, and reading. And what they read, on Yalda and at weddings and at gravesides, and on a plain quiet evening, is poetry. This is hard to convey to an outsider. In Iran, poets are not a school subject. They are household company. Hafez, who lived in Shiraz in the 1300s, is read for pleasure and also for guidance. People open his collected poems at random and take whatever lines they land on as an answer to a question they were carrying. His tomb in Shiraz is a working shrine, busy at all hours, where strangers sit and read to themselves. Ferdowsi gave the language its great book of kings and in the process helped keep Persian itself alive. Rumi and Khayyam get quoted by people who have never once called themselves literary. The poems are simply in the air, the way the qanat water is in the ground. The people carrying all of this are not one people. Around 90 million live in Iran now, most of them in cities, and the country holds Persians, Azeris, Kurds, Arabs along the southwest, Balak in the southeast, and others, each with its own tongue and its own table. The shape of the population is shifting too. Families are smaller than a generation ago. The birth rate has dropped below replacement, and the typical citizen is now somewhere in their 30s. A country that thinks in millennia is, at this moment, growing older year by year, the same as everywhere else. What holds it together is not the government of any given decade. It is the smaller, more stubborn stuff. A line of Hafez, a dish of green wheat in March, a glass of tea pushed toward a stranger. Empires left their names on stone. The people kept the calendar. Pull back far enough, and the contradictions stop fighting each other. They just sit there, all at once, true together. This. Here is a country that measures itself in thousands of years and gets measured by the rest of us in news cycles. This. A place where a child can grow up, reciting a poet 700 years dead, in a city where the rent is impossible and the currency is a moving target. The water still runs in tunnels older than the alphabet most of the world writes in. The salt desert is still merciless. This. The blue domes are still up, and some of them carry cracks now that no one can afford to repair. It would be easy to tell this as a tragedy the old civilization brought low. It would be just as easy to tell it as a postcard, all gardens and saffron and nothing hard. Neither version is honest. The truth is that both are happening on the same street on the same afternoon. A family laughs over toddig in one kitchen, while 3 blocks over, someone counts notes and comes up short. Grief and stubbornness and plain joy are not taking turns here. They share the table. That is what the headlines cannot hold. A headline needs the story to resolve, to be rising or falling, to mean one clear thing by Friday. A place does not work like that. Iran outlasted the Greeks who burned Persepolis, the dynasties that raised it and lost it, the reformers and the hardliners, the wars and the sanctions, and it will outlast this decade too, changed. The way it has come out of every century changed. Whether changed for the better is not a question anyone honest answers inside a documentary. The people living it do not get to skip to the end either. What stays with you is not the ruins. It is the persistence. The baker who opens at dawn, no matter what the news says. The grandmother who sets the Hafez scene even in a hard year, maybe especially in a hard year. The slope of a tunnel cut by a man 2,000 years gone, still doing the one job it was built for. None of that asks the outside world for permission, or even for attention. It just keeps going, underground, downhill, toward a field you cannot see from the road. So here is the question, before you scroll on to the next thing. How much of any country do you actually know, and how much of it is only the loudest week it ever had? Meet most places this way, through their worst headlines and their best advertising, and almost never through the slope of a tunnel or the snap of a crust of rice. Iran is an extreme case of something true of everywhere. There is always a country under the country. If a place came to mind just now, somewhere you realize you only know from the news, put it in the comments. Name the country you think you know and don't. Might go there next. As for this one, picture it the way it began. Down at the bottom of a hand-dug shaft, out of the heat, in the dark, where the only sound is water moving on a grade, some stranger set more than 2,000 years ago. It does not know what the real did today. It has never read a headline. It is just going where it has always gone, patiently, downhill, into the fields, into the next 1,000 years. Listen for it. The next time you see the name.